welcome to Season 2 of the Accidental Badass Podcast. I'm your host, Erin Hallstrom. In this podcast, I talk to people about their stories of courage, bravery, and resilience. This season, we have a great lineup of guests, and I'm excited to introduce you to all of them. To kick Season 2 off, I'm talking with Oscar. He's an emergency room nurse in the Chicago area. In this episode, we talk about the level of badassery it takes to be a healthcare worker on the front lines of a deadly pandemic. Listen in as we talk about the toll the pandemic has taken on our most important frontline workers, how he survived the last year mentally and physically, and most importantly, the advice he has for everyone listening in. Enjoy the episode. Oscar, welcome to the Accidental Badass Podcast. How are you doing today?
Hi, Erin. I'm doing well. I couldn't be better. I've got a day off today. I'm happy to be here on the Accidental Badass Podcast, and I'm delighted that you chose to ask me a few questions. I'd be happy to share with you my insights.
Yes, I'm very excited, especially given what's going on in the world, and especially what's been going on in the last kind of week and a half with things. We're talking about healthcare and frontline hospital workers and what you have done and been doing this year. Very near and dear to my heart. I know my mom works in healthcare, and I've probably had some anxiety on some level with her being in healthcare, and then knowing where you are and what you do, kind of knowing you personally and seeing what you've been talking about with patients and patient care. I don't think there is enough gratitude in the world to be giving you and your coworkers for what you've been doing this year. So I definitely want to dive into COVID-19 and how the pandemic has changed the way you work in a bit. But for now, can you walk me through your job? What exactly do you do?
So I work at a local hospital here in Chicagoland. I am an ER nurse. I've been doing this for a few years, so I'm getting better at it. And nothing like getting better at it than through a pandemic. It's a fairly busy hospital. We probably before COVID, we used to take care of roughly 200 patients a day in the emergency room.
Talk about throwing you in the deep end and learning by immersion for being a pandemic. Before COVID, what did you enjoy most about your job?
I enjoyed the almost single focused mission everybody had in the ED. Everybody was there to take care of patients. We had a single focus and I guess objective that we saw from our leaders, and then when this hit, it seemed like we were getting guidance every other day that conflicted with the guidance that we got the day before. So, yeah, that was kind of COVID.
Yeah, I can understand that.
So back to your question, what did I enjoy? I enjoyed going into work and doing my job, and then after that, it's like, what are we doing today? Is it any different than what we're doing yesterday?
Yeah, like new and exciting. Well, maybe exciting is not the right word, but interesting cases that might walk into the emergency department. Before COVID, what did you enjoy the least about your job?
There's nothing really
if you're comfortable saying that.
Didn't like. No, there's a few French words that I'd like to use about myself and my job, and I like to feel that I have a joie de vivre and an esprit de corps, and I can't explain it. So my third French term is je ne sais quoi, because I don't really know why, but I absolutely loved everything about my job. I love going in. I just give everybody high five. So there wasn't too much that I didn't like. But I guess if I had to narrow it down to something I didn't like, well, I didn't like cleaning poop.
Yeah,
nobody does.
Nobody does. I can't say I blame you there. I would imagine bodily fluids would be a least favorite component of the job, or waste materials. Definitely, I can understand that. What prompted you, or why did you decide to pursue a career in healthcare?
I was a CPA, so nursing and healthcare was a second career for me. My first career landed me at one of the better CPA programs, so I have a degree in accounting and finance from a local university, and that's what I did for about 20 years. And then after a while, my life got really comfortable, and I felt like I need a new challenge and need to give more. My sister is a registered nurse, and my brother is a teacher here in Chicagoland in the Chicago public school system, and I thought of doing one of those. And, I felt the greatest impact was in healthcare, so I decided to become a registered nurse.
Okay. Interesting you bring that up. So my mom is a nurse and my sister is a teacher. I've started to observe that about people who have, either go into teaching or go into healthcare, paying a lot closer attention to how many people have that nurturing component, maybe in their family of origin or just the people they're surrounded by. Definitely all tend to be nurturers. And I loved what you said about how this is a second career, that this wasn't something that, woke up in your teens or 20s and said, yes, this is what I'm going to do. As we said, so, moving on to talking about COVID and how you've been in this for a few years, talk about, being thrown in the deep end of healthcare and learning everything there is to know about, how to treat and triage patients and when there's something going on that you can't diagnose. Let's talk about COVID. 2020 happens. Here we are. COVID-19 hits the U.S. and makes its way to Illinois and more specifically to Chicago. So what was your first thought when you heard about the virus when it wasn't in the United States?
I didn't really give it too much thought, honestly. There were a few cases here, not too far from here, I guess in Hoffman Estates. I guess a businessman traveled to Wuhan, China, and then gave it to his wife. And then he soon after his wife was hospitalized, then he was hospitalized. And so this was kind of an early epicenter back in early to middle of January, and then Washington was hot, and then New York City had the brunt of it, and it not just hit Illinois, but it hit everybody pretty fast. And what did I like about it? I didn't have much discussion. I didn't think about it. I thought it was just a bad flu originally.
So how did your thoughts about it change once it did start getting closer to home? The cases started to double and triple.
I mean, it hit closer to home for me fairly quickly. I have a cousin who's a social worker in a hospital, and she was asymptomatic, and she has elderly parents, in their late 60s, early 70s, and she brought the coronavirus home, and they became ill. One of them didn't make it out of the hospital. So, I've had it from a family perspective, from a professional perspective. I remember had a patient early who came in and just a little bit shortness of breath, and he's having some cardiac issues. And 2 minutes before we had to intubate him, he said, I don't want to die. Mm-hmm. Well, and I told him, I'm not going to let you die on my watch. So that was pretty tough when we started getting home and we started getting more cases. But before all of that, we started seeing people coming in with flu-like symptoms, and it wasn't serious. And so we would just assign a few people to them. And we started noticing some changes when there was a shortage of masks. I knew it started getting a little more serious.
Well, speaking of masks, can you walk me through What is it like for you right now when you're donning your PPE?
I'll go back early on, Erin. We knew it was going to be kind of crappy when we were basically conserving PPE, and we were told, well, only a few of you are going to be taking care of COVID patients because we're short on PPE. I'm not a small person. I've never been pregnant, and anyway, early on I drew the short stick, right? What is it called? You know, it was a luck of the draw. Early on, I would be what they would call the COVID bitch. Why? Because I fit the mask, and if you fit the N95 mask, the conventional standard N95 mask, you were the COVID bitch on that shift. And so early on, I was exposed to a lot of COVID patients, or a lot of patients with flu-like symptoms, and then, you know, it's not like we had testing available right away. But, I drew the short end of that draw, and but I never thought too much of it again. I just thought it was a bad case of the flu, and I was flu vaccinated, like we all are in our hospital, unless you have underlying conditions that rule you out of being vaccinated for flu. So I didn't think too much of it, so I didn't mind. That's part of my job. As far as PPE, you know, our regular PPE, when we're dealing with COVID patients, we have a N95 mask. We cover that up with a surgical mask, which is, you know, your typical cloth hospital mask. So we wear N95 masks, and then with each patient, you change the surgical mask. You know, some folks were more diligent about it than others. Some folks were comfortable with their surgical masks, and some were super cautious and wore everything from an N95, a surgical mask, a head covering, a face shield, a gown, and shoe coverings. So that was part of our get-up during when we saw a COVID or a flu-like symptom patient, and they would be put into a negative pressure room. And that was my day at work, but coming home was a little more stressful because you never knew what you were bringing home, because early on it's a contact, wipe everything down. So I was changing out of my hospital scrubs in the garage. Open the garage door with the automatic door opener. My partner would know that when the garage door opens, the shower goes on, and so I would remove all my clothing down to my underwear and run up to the bathroom and take a shower before I'd even, you know, give her a high five or a hug or anything. So that was my routine early. So I've tried to document a lot of this. I remember early on I used to throw my scrubs on my car hood and or take pictures of N95 masks that we had to reuse early on. So during this process, with the shortage of N95 masks, not just here, but, you know, throughout the country, because whatever, I don't want to get too political, but national stockpiles were diminished or whatever, they weren't restocked. So we were using our N95 masks for up to 5 days straight. We would be asked to put them in a bag, send them down to the lab, where they would heat them at a high temperature to kill off any kind of virus, and then they would literally have little hashes on them: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. After the 5th one, you were allowed to get a new one. Yeah, that was pretty nasty, and I've taken pictures of like our emergency room with all our re-cleaned or our cleaned up N95 masks, and that was the case not just in the emergency room. You would see that in a lot of the floors. And our hospital has a capacity of like 500 patients, so you would see that a new mask and new gown for every patient that you would see.
Honestly, can't even imagine it. I think there are parts of my brain that try to protect itself by not even imagining it. I can't even do it justice. Like I said in the beginning, how much what you've been, anyone who works in healthcare that has especially been on the front lines of this has been up against so much gratitude. So you're doing this, and you've got the shortage of PPE, and just you're working a lot. And I know something that we have seen and read about from a national perspective is you've got healthcare professionals working long hours. Obviously, I mean, we've got national pandemic. We need people. There's an influx, just so many patients. What kind of hours were you working, or have you been working? Has it been a difference from like what you were before COVID, or?
There's such a shortage of workers. I mean, we've had during the early part of this, when the epicenter was in New York, we had a couple of nurses that left our hospital, and not just our hospital, but the hospital I used to work at. They were at risk of closing down their ICU because all their ICU nurses went to these epicenters. So,
wow.
So everybody that stayed behind was asked to work more, and those that wanted to, you could decline working. You weren't. It wasn't a condition of your employment, but if you wanted to work more, it was available. So that was a challenge for me. I worked my 3 to 4 days a week, and my shifts are normally 7 a.m. to about 7:30, 8 o'clock p.m. So you work your 40 to plus hours a week, and that really hasn't changed. I recall, I'm an older person in a second career that demands that you stay on your feet. I remember a first few days of being a nurse, I remember telling Tracy, this is a young person's game. Because I would come home and soak my feet and try to have a couple of fingers of whiskey just to get through the day so I could go to sleep and go do it again the next day. So, yeah, physically it's been challenging. Yeah, but my hours haven't really changed much. I do as much as I can, and my challenge to myself is saying no. So I'm my own worst enemy.
Yeah, I can understand that. And again, I know you personally. I know the compassionate person that you are. So I would imagine seeing what everyone's dealing with, knowing you like I do, that it would be hard to be like, no, sorry, I have to walk away from this. God, you've never been that guy to me. I'm like, oh, no, not going to help. Yeah, that's for you guys to deal with. No, that's never been you in all the years that I've known you. Something that I hope we're able to talk more about once COVID has kind of, I know it'll never be gone, but something that's important that doesn't also get a lot of attention is like mental health, and especially the mental health of people working in healthcare. I know I've read a lot on how like just the collective PTSD that people working in healthcare right now are dealing with. That this is not something that we're going to be like, oh, we're going to wake up and everyone's going to feel great and this is fabulous and look at us, we're in healthcare. It's like, no, this is trauma. It is a mental trauma. It is stress. The most stress probably anyone in healthcare has dealt with. How has your mental health been through all of this?
I mean, there definitely is some trauma involved. I recall, when we first went on lockdown and we weren't allowing any visitors. And that was challenging because then you have to deal with, understandably, frustrated, emotionally charged family members. You're going from patient room to a phone to tell them what's going on, and you can only do so much. So you're being stretched out, and it can become aggravating and sad. And again, back to the trauma when we first went on lockdown, and then after that went away, I had a few days off, and my partner and I went away for a couple of days, and then watching a TV show where they were dealing with the same subject, the COVID, and dealing with a former nurse who was in the ICU, and she was there, and she was going to be removed from a ventilator, and she was doing it alone, and all that, just the rush of that moment, even though it's TV, brought back some emotional moments for me that I was working through at the hospital, and knowing that the next day I was going to be at work and I was going to deal with sadness again. Not just the sadness of illness, but the sadness of isolation. When you have patients who die alone. So that sadness of isolation, affects me, and but as far as coping, I've been very fortunate. I have friends like you, my family, my partner. Tracy's been nothing but a rock for me. She says she states that she doesn't know how she would have gotten through it without me, but there's no way that I would have gotten through this without her. So
yeah,
just having somebody to talk to at home.
Yep.
Tracy would ask me the other day, "How was your day?" And it came down, and she's not a health professional; she's a CPA. It was either a shit show or it was a good day. And so if it was a shit show, she would know how can I help? How can I help you? So I've been very fortunate that my mother is supportive, my sister is understanding, my two brothers are also very understanding and supportive, and they check on me. Just last night, got my call from my mother and asking me how I am, and that gets me through. And what also gets me through is knowing that I'm on this side of the nurse's station. Things could be worse for me, so I don't complain. I'm happy. I love what I do.
That's good. I think it seems to me, too, that just having that passion for taking care of people, it's what makes it a career choice versus a job. Yeah. I suspect you probably wouldn't have gotten this far, even like this year. Yeah, it's the passion for helping people that I would imagine has kept you going, and not, at the first sign, this spring when the shit show started. Keeping you from being like, yeah, you know what, forget it. This isn't worth it. I'm giving up. Yes, I can. I see that about you. You do. You've always had that passion for helping people. I sure as heck hope everyone that knows you, and even the patients who may not know you, but get to be treated by you, I hope they know how special you are, and that you get to be in their lives. And I know I feel very fortunate that I get to call you a friend. You're someone I can turn to, be like, not like I'm bouncing medical questions off of you, but, you're someone I know who I know is taking good care of people. So you talked about, Tracy, your partner, and your family just being there for you, which is great. How else do you take time for yourself so that you don't drown in the misery of everything?
I bike a lot. This year I probably biked about 1,500 to 2,000 miles. Not as much as I did last year, but that helped. And I also started going back into hiking. That was a passion of mine before I started working on my feet, just walking in the woods, walking up mountains. And over the last couple of months, I've returned to doing that at our local forest preserve. So yeah, also what gets me out of my my down moments is kind of help like my coworkers and help them deal with, whether it's bringing a pot of soup to work. That makes me feel good. So I always say that if people around me are good and my family's good, then I'm good. So I guess there was a point in my life when I used to dwell in misery, but that's not me anymore. So I think of how grateful I am for everything. And that's what gets me through this.
I like that. If people around me are good, then I'm good. What takeaways do you want people to hear about healthcare, COVID? What would you like just the general population of people listening to this to know?
I guess I would tell everyone, protect yourself, because most people have, this year has been a shit show. Everybody would agree that 2020 sucks, but it also has revealed some critical information that we need going forward. And people have revealed themselves to be relatively selfish, whether it's wearing a mask or otherwise, or showing up to a state house with guns drawn. People have revealed themselves to be very selfish. So I guess the takeaway was protect yourself, look out for yourself, because there's some people that may not have the same interest in mind. Protect yourself, protect yourself, protect yourself, and wear that damn mask.
I've said this to a few people, but I feel like in 2020 I really figured out and learned who my friends were, and who I wanted to be around, and who I was okay with not ever needing to be around ever again, just by observing social behaviors. I've had some level of COVID anxiety of being scared to get it, and so I know I personally have done a lot of self-isolation, bubbled myself. I've hung out with friends, but in very low numbers, and I see parties and big things going on, and I'm just floored. And I've made a lot of big personal decisions this year. I'm like, that those aren't people that I want to be around. Again, because it's the selfishness for me. It's like, no, you kind of showed me who you were. When all this stuff was going on, you kind of showed me who you were. So thank you, but no thank you. But
can I share one last thing with you?
Of course.
My respect for those folks that have gone through this alone and in relative isolation, my respect for them has just grown so much. Like I said, I've had the fortunate of going to work, whether it's, we know it's dangerous, but I wasn't isolated. I come home and I have my partner, so I'm not in isolation. But to me, the respect that I've had for the folks that have had to deal with this lockdown, whatever you want to call it, protective measures, my respect for them is just, it's through the roof. The fortitude to get through all this alone, they must have some really good fortitude that I respect so much.
The one thing that I know that I have realized that I do miss is hugging people.
Yeah.
My mom is in healthcare, and so she obviously has had certain rules in place for things throughout most of this. I haven't seen my family. I haven't seen anybody other than going to the grocery store. I haven't talked to in person anyone in my family since Thanksgiving week, and I'm going to my parents' house Christmas Eve night, and even that, all right, not that I was doing anything, but 2 weeks before, not doing anything 2 weeks after, and frankly, with the cases as high as they are now, I'm inside. Everyone can see me through a Zoom meeting if they want to. I sometimes feel like a zoo animal. You want to see me? Get on Zoom. Talk to me on the phone. Text me. But yeah, I definitely know the being here by myself, I think on some level has also, it's made me resilient to I can do things on my own, but at the same time, the isolation is almost draining. And first thing when I see my family is going to be like, oh my God, hug me and don't ever stop. Don't let go.
Sure.
I know I've told a few friends too. I never appreciated being in a bar listening to live music or being somewhere crowded listening to live music, and how much I missed being elbowed while going to buy a beer. And it sounds so simple, but I'm like, no, I kind of miss that just a little bit. That felt like normal to me. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
I really hope everyone listening just really listens to what you had to say today, because I think a lot of people, unless they are, unless they've had a family member, they've lost a family member, or have had a family member who's been severely compromised because of COVID, it just seems like something that they see or read about on the news, and it doesn't affect them. And I really hope people listening to you recognize it's not just the flu. It is bigger than that. And for the love of frickin' God, people wear a mask. I won't get political here either, right? But yeah, wear a frickin' mask. It's not that hard to do, really. It's not.
Thank you, Erin, for allowing me to share my perspective. I understand some folks may have a different perspective, but that's my frontline perspective.
And that's it for today's episode. Thank you for listening to the Accidental Badass Podcast. You won't want to miss the next episode, where I'll be talking with some pretty major badasses. Be sure to keep up on the podcast by subscribing on your favorite podcast streaming app. And if you're feeling generous, be sure to rate and review The Accidental Badass on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening.